What's up, everyone? Today we are painting the spiders, the Acromantula, from Harry Potter miniature adventure game from Night Models. That was a mouthful, but technically these token style minis, they're not really giant sculpts. They're pretty low to the ground, not a huge amount of 3D detail on these guys. They're definitely a great starter miniature for anyone that is interested in painting some high quality resin, but not 100% sure how to do it yet. I came up with a couple different paint schemes that I think look really nice, but if you'll join me down on the table, I'll show you how I did them. Alright, so I started by doing a black primer on all of the Acromantulas, the main Acromantula and the swarm. So we're going to start with the swarm first. I'm going to give you two separate color schemes, but I'm going to do one color scheme on the Acromantula swarm and then the other one on the Acromantula itself. And then you'll see multiple ways. I think any way that you can make them look like spiders, go for it. So I start with a dark brown from P3 Umbral Umber and pretty much coat the entire model. So this coats the spiders and the ground. So one of the unfortunate things about doing insects that are, you know, spiders or like ants or anything like that is that they're most of the time brown and black, and then the ground is brown and black, and so they kind of blend in. So we're going to work really hard to push some highlights so you can see the difference. After the full coating of brown, letting it dry, I then coated the entire model with some Nuln oil from Citadel. This is going to really make sure that the shadows are as dark as possible. Again, trying to make it so that when we do the highlights, they really stand out. You want to let this dry for a long while, and then I mix some wolf gray into the Umbral Umber, and that's what we're going to start our highlights. And I go around and pick out all of the areas of the body that are not in shadow. So we do the abdomen and thorax, the legs, all 8 legs of the spiders. So there are 2 main spiders on the swarm that you can see right on the top. Then there is one that is in the front that's kind of like smashed into the ground. And then there's one in the back that is being climbed over. So altogether it looks like there are 4 separate spiders on here. And you just have to sort of work at it to see where they all are and how you're going to do it. So here's a second layer, a little bit more wolf gray put in, and you can see I'm not covering as much as before. You can see a little bit of the lighter brown, the darker brown, and the black. But I'm just trying to pick out all of the raised areas here, just making sure that you can tell the difference between the spider body and the muddy brown forest floor. Now we're up to some pure wolf gray. So wolf gray is a very light gray color, and what I'm doing here is I'm pretty much lining all of the areas around the abdomen here. And these are going to become white lines, but you can see I'm bringing it all the way to a point down at the bottom, and this is where I'm giving a little bit of, I guess you can call it flair or some like character to the models. Otherwise you're just going to have brown spiders, which is totally fine. But to give them a little bit of something special, I wanted to pick out all of the joints on all of the legs. So you can see I'm picking out the top joints, and I also did those lines on the back. Now about half of each line I am doing an ivory. So this one is also going to hit all of the kneecaps as well, but now I'm just focusing on the ones more central to the model. So the ones that are way off on the sides, you imagine that those would be a little bit darker, and so I'm not hitting every single one. I'm just focusing on more the highest ones. And now I'm using a pure white, and I'm hitting again about half of the ivory. And I'm going to focus on the kneecaps that are just in the center of the model here. So that gives us some white stripes on their back. Now I'm using Umbral, Umber, and waaagh flesh, and that is giving me a very greenish brown, deep green color that's going to look like moss and mildew. And I'm putting that over all of the fallen logs that are underneath these spiders. So this is a good way to add some color variation into the model. Now I'm using some pure waaagh flesh, and this is very watered down. I didn't use this straight out of the bottle at all. You want to water this down as much as you can. And you can see here that I'm just kind of tapping it around in some areas, just giving a nice green wash to the logs and the stones to put a bit of moss on them. Now you can come back and do a couple extra layers of it if you want it a little bit more green, but that'll be up to you. Now carbon black is an ink, so I'm using a black ink here, mainly because it is a very, very dark black, and it goes on very thin. So you can see here I'm putting a black line right down the center of the butts of these spiders, and then I'm also putting a little tiny dot on each of the knees. Again, just to add some character to the model. I'm also going to use this on any of their toe claws that we can see, which you can't see on all of the models. And I also use it on any of the fangs that I could see. So now we're moving on to the main Acromantula. And now this one I'm doing a little bit differently. I'm still using Umbral Umber, but I want to create a black spider on this one, not a brown spider. So in order to do that, I am painting all of the rocks. Even though the rocks are going to eventually be gray, I just want to coat everything in Umbral Umber to make everything look real dirty brown, and also for it all to be very similar and stand out against the color of the spider. So now I'm using some German gray, and I'm going to coat the entire rock faces in the German gray. And I was using too small of a brush here. I was a little too worried about it hitting the spider, but you don't really need to worry that much. You can use a little bit bigger brush and get it done quicker. In other words, you can be a little sloppy at this point because you're going to be covering the spider in black anyway, which will cover right over the German gray. It's not enough of a color variant to actually show up. So you always want to be neat, but it's okay if you get some of the German gray in a place that you don't want, but you should not be getting it on any of the brown, because the brown is going to be your dirt, your logs, things like that, which are pretty easy to pick out. This model, even though it is another like big hunking mass of plastic, it's actually easier to pick out than the Acromantula Swarm, which is much harder. I'm using Nuln oil again to bring out all the variations. Again, we want to make, even though we're talking about having a brown muddy floor, we do not want this to look different than the other Acromantulas. So Nuln oil is going across all of it. And this you can put on the spider or not on the spider, doesn't really matter. Because we are going to coat the spider anyway. And so we have black from Vallejo model color, and here is what I was talking about. We're going to coat the entire spider. Even though you used black primer on the spider, you do not want that primer to be your base coat. That's not really the best way to do things. It does speed up the process. I don't have to do 15 coats of black trying to cover up white and make it solid. I can just do a single coat, but the reason you want to do this is you want consistency, and primer is meant to make paint stick. It is not meant to be a consistent coverage of paint. So if you use a paint and primer, maybe it's a little different. And if you're looking at this more of a game piece and you're just coming to me for some help in color schemes, then then that is fine, and you can do whatever you want. It's your game. But if you're trying to make them stand out a little bit, you don't want to use your paint and primer as your base coat without recovering it with some of your model paint. Mechanicus Standard Gray, I'm putting on all of the rocks now, and this is going to be the main color for the rocks. Now you can do any kind of rocks. If you wanted to do sandstone, you wanted to do muddy rocks, so you keep them in the brown, that's fine, but I'm turning them into actual like granite stones, so Mechanicus Standard Gray is what comes out for that. Wolf Gray is going to line all of the stones. So I'm pretty much edge highlighting the best that I can, coloring a little bit extra because with rocks, being, I use the word loosely, but being sloppy with the lining of the rocks kind of gives them a really jagged feel to it. And I'm using the word loosely because you don't want to just like slop it on or be willy-nilly about it. You want to be targeted with it, but you let your brush hit a little heavier than you would if you were lining, say, somebody's cloak or a shield or something like that, where you want a very precise line. With a rock, a fatter line gives it a nice mixture of looking broken and jagged and stuff like that. So here's that watered down warg flesh, the same exact thing that I had before, and I'm painting this pretty much exclusively on the 2 wooden logs. I did tap just a bit on some of the rocks, but I didn't want it to become overpowered. So I did a couple of passes. So here you can see I'm just right where a couple of the rocks are meeting, I'm putting some of that green. So here's flat brown, and the flat brown I'm using as the base color for the logs. This is going on the raised portion because now I have some of that green moss down in the shadows. So you'll see at the end that this makes these logs look like they have mold growing on them and moss and things like that. So I think that works very easy for something so simple. Just a really quick wash of green and then painting brown over it, and you have a ton of dynamic colors on one very small piece of the model. And then here's Khaki just to give some highlights to the logs. And this is kind of important. You have a black model on a gray and brown base. If you don't do something special to it, it's going to just look like a rock, basically. It's going to look like a rock is sitting on your table. So now I've mixed some wolf gray into the black. I use wolf gray rather than Mechanicus Standard Gray for this, or like using just another color. The reason I use the wolf gray and mix my own is because I can do a gradient and I can put the black on my palette and then see exactly what color I'm going to without worrying about it making too much of a transition too quickly. The fear that I always have with working with gray as the highlight to black is that I'm going to make the model look like it's gray rather than that it's black. And my focus here was to have a black spider. It's going to be based off of a black widow. Even though this is a tarantula, obviously it's an acromantula, so it's based off of a tarantula. I want it to have a color variant of a black widow spider. So here I'm just highlighting the knees, same thing as we did on the swarm. And I did this same color pattern on 2 of the Acromantula swarms as well. So you can do this on the Acromantula swarms. I'm using flat red here. Now this takes about 3 or 4 coats because the red does not cover black very well, but I'm just doing it for the eyes. Because this one actually has visible eyes on it, you want to do a couple coats on there. So then here's carbon black, that's the ink again. And I'm using that carbon black to color in the hooks that are on the toes of each of the Acromantula. And then I actually do something a little special to this one as well, which I freehand it, and I'm going to show you it right now. It looks pretty freaking cool. There it is. I just drew a skull on his back. So you can see on the Acromantula swarms there, I actually put a like red hourglass on the swarms, but on the big Acromantula, it has a nice skull. Just, you know, to give it some flavor, to be fun with it, to try my hand at freehanding something. It's not, you know, the greatest thing ever, but it was fun to do, and it, you know, made these little tokens look a little special. But thank you guys so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. Check me out on Instagram at MemoriesofWe. I've already painted up a couple other Harry Potter miniature adventure game models. But do not forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.